In a fuchsia blazer, Governor Gretchen Whitmer told a Detroit crowd she was feeling good.
Thank you, everybody.
This was Election Night 2022.
And as the Michigan Democrats celebrated a double-digit re-election, a crowd on the other end of I-75 in Atlanta cheered another decisive win. This one for Georgia's Republican governor, Brian Kemp.
It looks like the reports of my political death have been greatly exaggerated.
Over 6 years, Whitmer and Kemp ushered in sweeping policy changes on abortion, voting, guns, while remaining hugely popular in closely divided states.
But this year, neither politician is on the ballot. Some voters wish they were. I'm WABE Politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE Politics reporter Rahul Bali, and this is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Sam, when Republicans converge on Milwaukee next week for their national convention and Democrats follow suit in Chicago a few weeks later, lots of attention will be on delegates and politicians from swing states. You wanted to focus on Georgia and Michigan. Why?
Well, first, for a personal reason. These are my two homes. I was born and raised in Michigan and now call Georgia home. And obviously, I'm biased here, but I think these are two of the most fascinating political states in the nation. Georgia and Michigan moved in tandem during the last two presidential elections. They both elevated Donald Trump in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020. But Rahul, in the midterms, they elected governors who pushed their states in opposite directions and are now rising stars on the national stage at a time when there's a lot of conversation about some of the weaknesses of the candidates at the top of the ticket running for president.
So, Sam, you've been spending a lot of hours in the summer heat talking to voters wherever they are, both in Michigan and Georgia. Talk to me about who you met.
So yeah, you're right, Rahul. I've spent a lot of the last several weeks talking to a lot of voters, and one thing I keep hearing is voters who are not happy with their choices. This has been a stretch where former President Donald Trump has been convicted on felony charges, and then the U.S. Supreme Court granted broad immunity to presidents from criminal prosecution. And then, as I mentioned, we're coming off a debate when even many Democrats have started to fear that Biden could not win and serve a second term. So let's begin on Belle Isle. It's this storied island park in the Detroit River where I met mother-daughter Deborah and Sharday Stanley. They were grilling burgers and hot dogs before the annual fireworks display. Now, Deborah is deciding between Biden and Trump, but for Sharday,
it's between Biden and the couch.
Sharday enthusiastically voted for Biden in 2020, but she says she hoped for more progress on climate change and healthcare, and now thinks it's probably too late for Biden to sway her. But ask her about Michigan's governor.
I love Big Rich.
If she was the Democratic nominee, would your choice be more easy?
Absolutely. It would be no questions asked. Absolutely. That'll be the person that I vote for.
The Stanleys basically credit Whitmer for guiding Michigan through the pandemic and protecting abortion rights.
Hey, Sam, bring it back down I-75. And did you hear similar sentiments here in Georgia?
Yeah, let's go to Alpharetta, one of those northern suburbs of Atlanta that for a long time voted reliably Republican. But in the Trump era, that has been changing. At the Wills Park Pool in Alpharetta, I met Ryan Connor relaxing near the yellow water slide. Connor told me he reads the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and he's been pretty happy with Republican Governor Brian Kemp.
He kind of stood up to political pressures to just throw the election in Trump's favor in 2020. So, I gained a lot of respect for him at that point.
But Connor says he cannot bring himself to vote for Trump. You know, I also met Deanna McKay relaxing on a lounge chair in the shade, and she has grappled with whether her vote matters much, even in a state and city that has shaped recent elections.
Socially, Biden, but financially, Trump. It gets a little frustrating because these aren't the two candidates that I would choose.
But Rahul, after watching last month's debate in Atlanta, McKay says she will not be voting for president at all.
So, Sam, you've also been talking to state lawmakers who are running in competitive districts. How are the dynamics of the presidential race shaping how they're running their races and what they're hearing from voters?
Well, Rahul, some down-ballot candidates are basically hitching their campaigns more tightly to their popular governor rather than their party's candidate for president. In Georgia, just a few seats are toss-ups. Republican State Representative Matt Reeves represents one of them, and he says his suburban Atlanta district narrowly voted for Biden and then for Kemp.
In my race, I'm focusing on the issues here in Georgia, and I want to make sure that people know that regardless of what they think about the presidential race, that I'm a reliable, consistent person who's on call to take care of those issues here in Georgia.
Now, when Reeves knocks on doors talking to voters, he talks more about tax relief and public safety than the state's roughly 6-week abortion ban passed by Republicans. And he won't say who he voted for in the GOP presidential primary. But he says even so, it can still be hard to avoid national politics.
First half of my life, national politics was focused on pursuing common ground. You had Reagan and Bush and Clinton. And then, the last 20 years during my adult life, there's been a lot of partisanship.
I also talked to Democratic State Representative Carol Glanville in suburban Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is an area that she says is home to a lot of what she calls Jerry Ford Republicans, these voters who are pragmatic and willing to split their tickets. And when she knocks on doors, Glanville says one issue keeps coming up.
I can't describe exactly how I feel when a woman I don't know is on the front porch with me telling me about a lost pregnancy because it feels like people aren't listening.
So, Rahul, that's a little sampling of how some of these competitive district state lawmakers are navigating the national dynamics that are so present in this election year.
So let's take a break here. This is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Welcome back to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Okay, let's get to the governors themselves. It seems like they're in the middle of all of this. Presidential politics atop the ballot, the state and local dynamics down ballot. Sam, how are they navigating this? They're really in a tricky spot.
So Kemp is headed to the Republican convention next week, but not for a speaking slot. He broke with Trump, of course, after refusing to help overturn Georgia's 2020 election result. But in the red-carpeted debate spin room last month, Kemp told reporters he cast a blank primary ballot.
I've said all along I was going to support our nominee. I am doing that. We had a lot of great candidates that ran, but he's at the top of our ticket. He wants to win Georgia, and I want to win Georgia too.
And after that debate, of course, some Democrats began calling on Biden to step aside. Whitmer, a campaign co-chair, is regularly mentioned as a potential replacement and asked in an NPR interview whether Biden is the best choice to defeat Trump. This is what she said.
Our choices on the ballot right now are President Biden and former President Trump. I am an enthusiastic supporter of President Biden's, and I'm going to work my tail off to make sure he gets a second term.
So, Rahul, you can really hear both of these governors walking this fine line between supporting their party's nominee and also, working around some of the realities on the ground in their home states.
So, Sam, tie this all together for me. What were your takeaways digging into the politics of these two swing states at this critical moment in the 2024 campaign?
Rahul, 2024 will test the condition of Democrats' blue wall in Rust Belt states like Michigan, and Georgia may provide some clues about Republicans' future in the dynamic Sun Belt. Still, Emory University professor Andra Gillespie is cautious about drawing parallels.
So, I have to admit, I think Georgia and Michigan are kind of apples and pears.
Okay, she says apples and pears, maybe more like apples and peaches. But Gillespie says the states are demographically different and they're politically competitive for distinct reasons. But Michigan pollster Richard Chuba says it is worth asking whether voters' good vibes toward their governors can translate into votes for the top of the ticket. He says Kemp and Whitmer have at least one superpower working in their favor.
She's the neighbor who waves you over with a beer and a bonfire, meaning people relate to her. And I think when we talk about these governors, one of the reasons they're effective is they act normal. It's a normal Michigander. It's a normal Georgian.
And Rahul, Chuba says that can go a long way in an election cycle that has been anything but normal.
And we're going to keep following all of this, starting with the RNC next week.
Rahul, before we go, I want to turn to some of your reporting this week. One of the deadlines has come and gone for independent and third-party presidential candidates to get on Georgia's ballot. Tell us what happened this week and then what happens next.
So, Sam, this past Tuesday was the deadline to file petition signatures to get on the November ballot in Georgia. That number is 7,500. 3 campaigns filed this week: progressive activist Cornel West, socialist Claudia de la Cruz, and independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, real quick before I continue, I want to correct something I said on a previous podcast that was wrong. Claudia de la Cruz represents the Party for Socialism and Liberation and not the Democratic Socialist of America. So, to answer your question, Sam, what happens with all of those signatures? The Georgia Secretary of State's office will send them to county election offices to be verified. Again, 7,500 is the number to put those candidates on the November ballot. Now, a couple of other interesting numbers to note. The RFK folks told me that they turned in more than 21,000 signatures. De La Cruz's folks told me they did double the 7,500 number, and Cornel West's folks told me they did quadruple the 7,500. These folks are not taking any chances because, in all likelihood, there are going to be signatures thrown out for any number of reasons, including incomplete information.
Rahul, I know you were at the Capitol this week when RFK campaign staffers and volunteers made their way to turn in their signatures. I think you actually ran into one of these volunteers looking for directions. Tell me how this all unfolded.
So the Georgia Secretary of State's Elections Division office is actually across the street over in what's known as the Sloppy Floyd building. The volunteers brought 7, 8 office cardboard boxes. Some of those boxes had like names of counties on them, because that's how you have to sort them. As I mentioned, the next step is for counties to verify the signatures. There was a little bit of negotiating in the room, the crossing of T's, the dotting of I's before state officials roll the boxes into the back of the office. I had a number of interesting conversations, including with Melinda Hicks. She's an RFK supporter and a volunteer from Alpharetta. She collected more than 600 signatures. She talked about some of the conversations she had at a wide range of events.
We would have people who would come directly up to us. They were so excited. They were like, oh yeah, I'll sign. And we even picked up new volunteers that way. Then we would have some people who are like, nope, I'm voting for Trump, but we deserve to have another choice. There needs to be another choice on the ballot. And so they were all for signing. We had some people that blew us off, some people that, maybe were a little bit like he's a spoiler candidate, that kind of thing.
Now, one of the other 3 campaigns told me they expect the verification process to be completed sometime next month.
And Rahul, can you just update us on some of the other candidates?
So the campaign of Green Party candidate Jill Stein tells me they intend to qualify under a new state law that allows Georgia ballot access once a third-party candidate is on the ballot in 20 other states and territories. The deadline for that is August the 23rd. And then 2 weeks ago, I was at the state capitol as the electors for Libertarian presidential nominee Chase Oliver officially qualified. Under Georgia law, he automatically qualifies because of the number of votes his party got in the 2022 general election in Georgia. So, Sam, we're looking at the possibility of 7 presidential candidates on the ballot this November. And again, as we've said in the past, there are 2 important reasons to point this out. First, Georgia voters have generally, in the past few election cycles, only seen 3 presidential candidates: Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. So what happens with that is going to be interesting, and what happens with the final presidential results in a state decided in 2020 by less than 12,000 votes.
All right, before we go, Rahul, one more thing. Trump released his vision for the Republican Party platform this week. It was an all-caps Word doc, and it had one notable exception. What was that?
So, Sam, that vision is now reflected in a draft platform that was adopted by the Republican National Committee's Platform Committee. It specifically leaves out explicit language on a national abortion ban, something that's been in the party platform since the 80s. What it does say is that the 14th Amendment guarantees no person can be denied life or liberty without due process. that kind of goes back to this idea that overturning Roe v. Wade sent the issue back to the states rather than pursuing a federal abortion ban or even a constitutional amendment.
So what are conservative activists here in Georgia saying about this?
So, Sam, at the state capitol and on the campaign trail, one of the people I like to talk to is Cole Musio. He's the president of Frontline Policy Action. He calls his group a Christian organization that is involved in politics. And he says he's disappointed in the platform and calls it an unforced error.
What I think we see in the Republican Party platform now is something that's heavily poll tested and moderate and driving toward what a current policy might be. I don't think the next president of the United States will have an opportunity to pass any sort of federal legislation restricting abortion. But at the same time, I don't think that should be in our party platform, is reducing what the ideal should be, which is protecting human life. And so I think with Donald Trump, what we've consistently seen is a watering down of what the ultimate goal should be. And I think that's a mistake.
And Rahul, what could this mean for November?
Well, Sam, I put that question to Musio as well.
I do think that there's a dampening of enthusiasm. I've heard from a lot of pastors and a lot of faith leaders that are very concerned about the platform, and not just what the platform says, but the aggressiveness with which the Trump campaign and Trump himself advocated to water this down, and the degree to which he has pushed back on pro-life policy in various states. I'm hearing from a number of people that have declared that they don't intend to vote for him at the moment. I think between now and November that will change. The extremism and the ineptitude of the Biden administration will bring a lot of voters that aren't thrilled with Trump into the Trump column.
Musio's bottom line is that he believes this will not bring in new voters for Trump, and it will make others less enthusiastic. Again, why is this all important, Sam? Any group of voters that turns out well or doesn't turn out as well could shift the presidential results in Georgia.
That's it for this edition of Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. You can get more Georgia politics at wabe.org/election 2024.
Plugged In is a production of the WABE Politics Desk. Our producer is Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick. If you appreciate the reporting you hear in this podcast, subscribe and leave us a review.
Have a great weekend.